This is the Be1 Change 1 podcast, where our mission is to help listeners define values, practice integrity, and inspire change.
Our vision is to mentor men and empower them to achieve more by taking responsibility for shaping their own lives.
He's Cass, an evolving man who has been shaped by adversity and continues to grow through his imperfections.
And he's Roscoe, an imperfect work in progress that tries to suck less every day.
Between us, we have over 40 years of Air Force fighter pilot experience with countless hours as trainers, instructors, and mentors.
Join us and learn to take responsibility for your own life as we dive into subjects from leadership to resilience to vulnerability.
Be the one who changes their course. Be decisive, driven, and purposeful. Set the example for others. Lead. We wish we'd had this show when we were younger men.
Be the one.
Well, but it's been good, though, because when you get a melting pot like that together, this is going to go great into our conversation. When you get a melting pot of people together from different backgrounds and different communities, right, they bring really good, well, what they think is really good idea.
Yeah.
The key is, though, is you got to have somebody that's sort of herding the cats.
You do.
And going, okay, that's a good idea, but we're gonna save that for later. Right now, let's focus on these good ideas, right?
Yeah.
Because this is the way I imagine it. For the listeners, we're talking about modern day flying of the jets, and we'll get into the F-47 here in just a little bit. But this is the way I imagine. I imagine a big auditorium with a bunch of, like, in the audience, you got it's stadium seating, and you got over here, you got Viper guys, and then you got some Strike Eagle guys. Or actually, Strike Eagle guys get the middle because there's 2-to-1 ratio.
Yeah,
there.
2-to-1 ratio there.
Space, right?
Yeah.
You got Hog guys, Viper guys. I mean, every mix of fighter aviator is in this room in the auditorium, and then you get a bunch of nerds in lab coats that walk up onto the stage and sit down at the table with their pocket protectors, and they put out their legal pads, and people just start shouting out good ideas. Right. Well, we're from the Viper community. We need this. And we're from the Strike Eagle community. We need this. And the Hog, we need a gun, all this shit. And the nerds write it all down. And then they draw a line and they go, anything above the line gets in on the first cut. Anything below the line, TBD. Right. That's what I imagine it happened like. But every one of those people in the audience, as they're shouting out that stuff, they think that that's the best idea.
Yeah.
Right. In the Viper, we need a fucking dauber switch. We cannot fly without a dauber switch, Yeah. And in the Strike Eagle, it's like, we need the biggest radar on the planet,
Yeah.
and a Wizzo.
Yeah.
Obviously, some things make it and some things don't.
Yeah.
So, anyways.
No, that's a good point. I mean, I remember doing some of the initial F-35 stuff for BFM with those guys. You have basically this room full of patches.
Yeah.
F-22, Strike Eagle, Viper. I don't know if there were any A-10 guys yet. Probably A-10 guys. And they're just trying to figure out their basic BFM game plans, how they want to run their setups. And dude, the amount of argument that existed, not even over the baseline tactic they wanted to teach, but just how they were going to do the setups I was just sitting there going, there's not enough Jack Daniels in this fucking vault for me to sit through this for 2 hours. I'm just going, and it's because everybody's got their idea. It's competition, right? Everybody's got their idea, and the way that they've grown up doing it is the best way to do it. No consideration for, okay, well, how do we need to drive the setup so that we can maximize the learning potential and execution of whatever the baseline tactic is we're trying to drive, right? No conversation about that at all. Just basically C model guys, Viper guy, F-22 guy going, no, I'm better, I'm right, you're wrong. And I'm just like, dude, you guys got to stop it. Just knock it the fuck off, right? So it was funny.
Yeah. Well, it's been fun for me because I was kind of an outsider coming in. I mean, a Strike Eagle guy going to a 5th gen single seat world. A little bit of an outsider coming in. It was the community was and maybe still is, even to a degree, very heavy on the Viper side because the natural transition at Luke Air Force Base. That was really kind of the driving factor of that.
The majority of guys that they transitioned initially were from the Viper community.
Right, and it made sense. But because of that, a lot of our verbiage, a lot of our game plans, a lot of our our pubs were based on Viper stuff,
Yeah.
you know? And then we found out we've evolved over time, and we found out that those aren't always the best.
Yeah.
And so I've really enjoyed, it is frustrating every 6 months we either get a new 3-1 or a new tack rec that comes out and says, hey, we're changing all this shit. That's a little frustrating, but you can see the evolution, and people are going, okay, well, old think doesn't work anymore. We have to start new think, and let's let the weapon school and the 422 do their thing, and really test some of these things out, and then let that trickle down, and let's start to build our own identity. And that's really kind of what we're after, right? Is we don't want people to look at the new generation of fighters coming out and go, well, that's just a fucking Viper with cool glossy finish, right?
Yeah.
No, this is a totally new tactics, new people, new ways to look at the battle space. I mean, everything.
Yeah, you have to evolve, right? Like you're saying, you have to build tactics that are suitable for the capabilities of the aircraft, not just have it fall back on what we've always done, or this is what we did when I flew X, right? Because the capabilities of the aircraft are different, and you've got to match that tactical development to the capabilities of the aircraft so that you can maximize that lethality and survivability and efficiencies and all that stuff. So anyway.
Well, and I would even back it up. I would even back it up and say it's not just tactics; it's even strategy.
Yeah, totally.
I mean, up at a strategic level, and when you look at the battle space, man, you just have to look at it differently now.
Yeah, definitely at the operational level. That was the thing that I saw the Marine Corps struggle the most with. Just not to get off topic for too long, but when we were doing some of the initial F-35 stuff in the Marine Corps, they got those C models pretty quick, and man, they struggled because for decades, Marine Corps air power is cut to the MEF commander for close air support, and those assets don't even make the ATO unless the MEF commander releases them. And so they're so cast centric, and we're sitting there in these conferences, and we're like, dudes, you're not day one. You're doing deep interdiction.
We're not doing CAS on day one.
You're not doing CAS,
so to speak.
And oh, by the way, you're not cut to the MEF commander anymore. You're on the ATO. You're a strategic asset.
That's right. Yeah.
And they just, and don't get me wrong, the Marine Corps guys are probably closer to us than I think, in my experience, any other service as far as their flexibility, because they're just like, okay, how do we adapt to get the mission done? Like they're so mission focused, right? But dude, it was such a huge doctrinal shift for them that they really struggled with it at the beginning.
I bet, man. I bet. And, I think we find in maybe the Marines and the Army, they are a little bit more driven by that doctrine. And
Army's the worst.
It's almost like dogma to those guys,
It's not in the field manual. I can't do it.
Thou shalt not deviate from FM. Hold up, dude. Like, and I've got a really good story in my book coming up about. I remember I was sitting in this meeting at the JRTC, the Joint Readiness Training Center down at Fort Polk, Louisiana, and we're doing this big exercise with the brigade that I'm getting ready to deploy with. So Army brigade goes down there, and we're attached to them, so we went. And I'm sitting in this targeting meeting one day, or this planning meeting. And it's one of those big conference room tables with people, it's captains and majors all the way around it. And I'm sitting like the 06 is here at the end of the table, and I'm sitting in like the second chair on the side over there. Because similar to where I sat every meeting that you and I ever did in our conference room. So anyways, I'm sitting there for like an hour, and man, the Army loves PowerPoint. So they're throwing up PowerPoint slides, and they got all this cool shit, right? And all these cool words. And you can tell it's like copy paste out of the doctrinal thing, right? The MDMP, military decision-making process, is like on slides. There's 50 of them. This fucking sucks, right? Yeah. And at the end of it, I'm just like gnawing on my fucking pen, right? Because I can't stand this shit. We get to the end, and the 06 is like, well, so what are we doing though? Like, we don't really know what we're doing. That was good, but we don't know what we're doing. And I hated to do this, man, because I'm like the only Air Force guy in the room. I'm a fucking captain at the time, and I'm like, this is going to be bad. Like, I'm fixing to take a lot of stones here. But I raised my hand, and he goes, yeah, Roscoe, go ahead. And I said, sir, if I may, just for a second here. What you've got here is an easy problem to solve. Now, it's not going to be a simple solution, but it's an easy problem to solve, right? There's a difference there. So let's just work from the target backwards. And I basically did what we would do in a 10-minute rally for an AI briefing, right? A deep interdiction briefing where you walk in, everybody gathers around a table, and your instructor flops down a picture of the target and says, "We're going to kill that. Figure it out." And we take 5 minutes, come up with a plan, and we go execute, right?
Yeah.
And so I did that on the back of a scratch piece of paper, and I slid it over to the 06. And he looks at it and he goes, "Guys, what the fuck? Like, Roscoe just did this on a scratch piece of paper in 5 fucking minutes. You guys spent days coming up with 50 PowerPoint slides that didn't tell me shit.
Yeah.
What the fuck are we doing?"
Right.
And it was that kind of, that was eye-opening to me. Like, how just rote they are in the way that they think. And I know I'm falling into one of these fallacies that we'll talk about later, but I'm throwing a blanket over the entire Army. And I know that there are guys out there that aren't like that, but I've sat in enough of these meetings to know that this is the way.
Yeah.
And it sucks. But
yeah.
At any rate.
Yeah. So today we're going to talk about cooperation and collaboration. Or competition and collaboration, not cooperation.
Yeah. Words are hard.
Competition and collaboration, And when do we compete, and when is it a good time to collaborate? And this can be difficult sometimes because I think this is nuanced because you can be doing both at the same time. If you go back to our previous lives in a fighter squadron, dude, you're competing every day. Every sortie you're competing for reputation, cred, who's going to go into the next upgrade. But you're also constantly in a collaborative environment, right? Where you're learning things from other people. You're gaining skills and knowledge from the people that you fly with. You're passing things on that you've learned to other people. It's a very collaborative environment, but it's also very competitive. So I thought it would just be a good opportunity to discuss the difference kind of between when's a good time to compete versus collaborate. And go from there.
Yeah. And in that example that you gave, man, and I know we're going to dive into this as we go through the hour or so here, but just in that example that you gave, yes, when you go out and strap the jet on, you're competing. When you show up for your brief, it starts there. Your mindset goes into a fucking winning mindset. I'm going to kill the target. And everything that you do for the next 3 or 4 hours is all about killing the target. And, as a 4-ship, four airplanes going down range, you are helping each other out. You're passing information. You're picking up slack when slack needs to be picked up. But the whole goal is to hit the target and come back. But then again, there's an undertone in, and I know we've hit this before in other episodes, but there's an undertone here of, hey man, if I can just look good in the debrief, then maybe my instructor will go into my flight commander and be like, "Hey, Roscoe had a really good flight today." And that, dude, like you said, that's cred, right?
Yep.
And then there's another sub undertone here of the job that you have in the squadron that is not flying jets. For example, if you're in the scheduling shop, right, you're going to get highlighted a lot more than the guy who's, I don't know, maybe in the safety shop and really doesn't do shit.
Yeah.
Ask me how I know. I was in the safety shop for a couple of years. I didn't do shit, right? It was great. But the guys in the scheduling and training shop are working their asses off, right? And they're going to get a lot more recognition because they interface with the DO and the commander every day. But that breeds competition, right?
Yeah.
So the guy who's, the shit pants lieutenant who's just a fucking third whip snacko is not getting the same recognition as the guy who gets put into the scheduling shop and has to build the schedule every other week. So the different levels, I think, is interesting to explore as well.
Yeah. Well, if you're okay with it, brother, let's just start with some definitions. I think that'll help kind of frame the conversation a little bit. So, at a very basic level, competition is basically where either individuals or organizations are competing against one another for limited resources or rewards, right? So if we go back to that previous example, right? In a fighter squadron, there's limited number of upgrades in each cycle for flight lead, for IP, right? So you've got a lot of guys in a squadron, but you may only have, 3 flight lead upgrades that are going to happen and 2 IPUG upgrades that are going to happen, right? And so those are limited resources. So competition for those, because so few of them get done over a 6-month cycle, is high. Versus,
You,
go ahead.
well, I was going to say you could almost like in parentheses right after the word resources put opportunities there too. Limited resources / opportunities. Yeah,
that's a great. I completely agree with that. 100%. While collaboration just focuses more on working together as a group or an organization to achieve some kind of a shared goal, right? So,
okay,
take a red flag mission commander example, right? Yeah. Not a lot of competition necessarily going on. You've got 12 hours to plan a very complicated mission set with multiple targets and a bunch of airplanes, right? It's a collaborative effort. You're taking input from a bunch of people, doing a bunch of different things to make sure deconfliction set and everybody's getting things going while you're kind of given the big overall game plan picture of how we're going to do and execute this thing. Yeah. So when to compete, at an individual level, from some of the research that I did, it said that some of the better times to compete are obviously like if maybe you're in a position where you're applying for some kind of a specialized role or limited position, right? That's a time to think about competition over collaboration, right? How do you set yourself apart from your peer group? How do you set yourself apart from potentially the other folks who may be applying for that position? Whether that's getting another certification, job experience, performance, all those kinds of things, right? Obviously, any kind of leadership position. Again, we're talking about opportunities that are limited, right? So if you just kind of frame it in that context, that's a good example of if you struggle about when to compete versus collaborate, because we've talked about collaboration a lot on the podcast too, right? And when we talked a little bit about leadership and building teams and things like that, that's when you want to compete. And they say that, it's better to collaborate if you have to work on maybe a complex problem that requires different perspectives or expertise, maybe expertise that's outside of your purview, right? That's obviously a time to collaborate. Yeah. If you try to go that alone, dude, the product that you're going to come up with versus a team that works collaboratively together is going to be not nearly as good as the team that collaborates on something like that. Or if you have limited resources, maybe there's some kind of a shared goal that needs to be accomplished by the organization, the team, whatever, but you have limited resources. That's a great time to collaborate because now you can bring in, other branches, other divisions that maybe have more resources available. That opens up the pool of resources available to you that'll let you to effectively achieve that shared goal, So those are kind of some baseline, just generic ideas of when it's good to compete versus collaborate. Now, I did do in that research, it said that research shows that people who work collaboratively maintain their focus 64% longer than those working alone while also experiencing higher engagement and less fatigue. And that makes sense, right? Because if I got to do it all. We've talked about this guy, right? If you're the micromanaging leader, your team is not going to be nearly as effective as the dude who sets the goal, sets the direction, and then delegates tasks and responsibilities and then follows up, right? Because you can't do all that on your own, right? The fatigue, juggling all those things at one time in the air by yourself isn't going to work. Eventually, you're going to miss something. Something's going to fall through the cracks, or you're not taking value and input from your team to catch any, shortfalls, blind spots, things like that. And so, obviously, collaboration works very well in a lot of situations. Any questions on any of that stuff?
I have no questions.
Okay. So examples of situations where efficient resource allocation through competition is crucial. This just goes these are just some generic examples of where competition may show itself more than collaboration, right? So we talked about opportunities for specialized positions, capital investment allocations for different businesses. If you're competing for, we were talking earlier about you were talking about how, hey, everybody sits in a room with the geeks in lab coats and goes, hey, we want this for our jet and we want this for our jet. Right. Well, that's limited resources. There's competition for each one of those things that's going to make that cut above the line. Right. That's the opportunity to compete. That's the opportunity to really make sure that whatever argument you're making is effective and is going to allow you to get that cut above the line versus below the line. So anyways, and then like we talked about, when collaboration, it's more about complex problem solving, resource sharing, and things like that. So, and a good example of this, and I think this is a really good example of competition, but also competition and collaboration at the same time, is think about the space race between the US and the USSR back in the day, right? So there's this huge push to who's going to get to the moon first, right? And dude, it's a straight up fucking competition. It's a straight up competition between the United States and the USSR.
That's operating on the assumption that we actually went to the moon. Be careful.
Okay, I am of the belief that we went to the moon. But like within that, on the US side and the USSR side, I would imagine, and there was a ton of collaboration that went on. I mean, if you think about NASA and the US government and all the agencies that they brought together and all the different scientific backgrounds that they brought together and, the resources that they brought together to share, to try to figure out how to make this rocket shit work and how to blow somebody from Cape up into orbit, and then eventually how to build a landing module and a rover. And dude, it's just, and think of all the different companies that were involved in that too, right? You got Boeing building things and Honeywell and, Rockwell. And I mean, all of these things that had to come together, all of this massive amount of collaboration that had to happen to compete, right? So they can happen at the same time, through as an example through that. So
let me offer an anecdotal something real quick. I have a lot of notes, and some of those notes are the counter argument to what you were just talking about.
Go.
Because there are, I think there's fair counter arguments in there to why it's good and why it's bad. But here's something just funny as a sidebar. You're aware of the SR-71?
Yes.
Are you aware that there's another jet that is identical in every way to the SR-71, except it's painted silver instead of black?
No.
It's called Oxcart. It was the first.
Oh, yeah, the first one.
It was developed for and by the CIA in the late 50s, and it was built by Lockheed Martin in Burbank, California, right? They were looking for not a replacement for, but a different capability than the U-2. The U-2, high, slow, really good at taking pictures of shit from high altitude. They wanted that capability, but they also wanted something. They also wanted something that could outrun the SA-2 Guideline missile.
Yeah,
right. So they came up with this. Lockheed came up with this idea for this airplane. They called it Oxcart, and they built it. And one of the challenges to flying at those extreme altitudes and speeds was not only the design and the size, but it was, what do we make this shit out of? What do we make this thing out of to be able to tolerate all this stuff? So we're talking about competition and collaboration, right?
Yeah.
They made it out of, starts with a T.
Titanium.
Titanium. Do you know where they got all that titanium?
I don't.
Mother Russia.
Nice.
They set up hand to God. They set up a shitload of shell companies and started buying up titanium from Russia, shipped it all to the United States, and built the plane that's going to go spy on Russia. Irony, right? But that's a good idea, or that's a good example of collaborating. And then obviously there's competition in there. And where I'm going with this is sometimes competition can lead to, dare I say, subversion. Some people would say thinking outside the box, alternate game plans, things like that, which is good because competition drives innovation, right?
Yes, it does.
Healthy competition will drive you to explore other opportunities. And a couple of things, just a couple of bullets I had written on that was driving innovation, enhancing quality in some cases, and encouraging efficiency.
Yep.
Which is really precision and speed when you get right down to it. But how accurately and quickly can we make this thing? Let's get a bunch of smart people in a room together and let's figure this out. I've been reading, I've read a lot on that period from the late 50s to probably the mid 70s or so. And that was, I mean, I think we can look back in our history as a nation and see that this was a huge boom for us. Technology was soaring, like innovation was getting crazy. We invented everything from the SR-71 to the internet to GPS. I mean, all this, the space race, all this stuff was going on right then. And yeah, it's a bunch of dudes in rooms that are coming up with ideas and trying to outpace that guy, whoever that guy is. Could be the other company, could be the dudes in the other room, could be Russia. Right. Who knows, right? So I think that's very healthy. Where I think it's unhealthy is when it comes to that subversion stuff. And let's look at it in a workplace environment. Let's look at it in your house. I mean, at a very micro scale, right? If you're competing with people at work, you're probably going to start to maybe inadvertently or unintentionally introduce either cutting some corners, and that's always bad. You are more open, I think, to gossiping because, I mean, here's the secret, dude. Like, if I can knock my opponent down a peg, that puts me up a peg.
Yep.
Whether I actually move forward or not, I mean, relatively speaking, I'm now ahead, right? So that's the slippery slope with the competition piece.
I agree. Yeah. Totally. And just going back to what you were saying around competition and its ability to create invention, right? Like to further invention and things like that. I mean, I think that's one of the reasons why the U.S. continues to be the dominant market in the world, even though we're not the largest population base in the world. And that's because our free market society allows for that innovation to occur on a regular basis. And it allows people to compete on a regular basis. And because we have that freedom of movement and freedom of capital, you've got venture capitalists that can go, oh yeah, that's a really good idea. Here's some money. Let's see where it goes, right? Where you don't have that in a country like China.
Yeah.
Where the party's kind of the all-seeing eye over everything. And only by the party's blessing does anything happen, right? So you're absolutely right. It does breed innovation. And I think what's difficult about this conversation too is if we're honest with each other, you're always competing.
You should be.
Regardless of where you are, right? There's right and wrong ways to go about it. And I think what I wanted to drive with this conversation was that recognition that, guys, you can compete, but there's right ways and wrong ways to do it to a certain extent, right? So if you're in a work environment, you're competing with the folks around you. You may be competing for that limited opportunity that's coming up down the road. But being a good team player and being able to collaborate well and effectively, to be able to rally resources and take in input from other people and get really good ideas and move that ball forward and achieve whatever that goal is, maybe faster than the other team does, that's valuable, right? And that allows you to not only compete, but then compete and win, right? That helps build that credibility for you. And you don't want to be subversive in that, right? You don't want to be the person that's, we had that conversation before about, the guys that's always sitting in the corner at work and just pissing and moaning about all the decisions that are being, don't be that guy, right? And don't be the guy that's going around gossiping or trying to undercut other people. You have to practice some integrity in this process, right? And just allow things to kind of unfold naturally. But I'm here to tell you, and it's not always true, right? Sometimes people have pet rocks, and sometimes the squeakiest wheel gets the grease, right? The people that make the most noise are the ones that seem to get promoted or get the advancement, and maybe they don't have all those skills. Those people are going to hit a plateau, though. They're going to hit a ceiling at some point, and all of that stuff is just going to break away from them, right? And so sometimes it's tough because if you're doing it the right way, you may not see the fruits of that, but your reputation is so important because your reputation is going to follow you wherever you go. Even if you go from one business to another, guess what? These managers know each other. The owners know each other. Like, people crosstalk these things, right? And you want to build a reputation that is positive, that follows you, not one that, oh yeah, he's a backbiting, undercutting motherfucker over there, and he's going to come in and just. So anyways,
that's valid. No, but I think you gave a good example in the pregame, and unfortunately, I wasn't smart enough to hit the record button while we were talking about this. But David's situation, we were talking about the humble, approachable, credible mantra, right?
Yeah.
Well, it's just, I mean, just think about that abstractly for just a second, right? When you're walking in life like that humble, approachable, credible, right? There's a lot of sub layers in there, but effectively, what you're doing is you are collaborating with other people. You're not walking around like you're the smartest guy and you have all the answers. You're asking questions. You're helping people. You're filling in blanks for people. You're accepting and relearning or unlearning some bad habits potentially, right? All the while, you're building your knowledge base so that you are credible, right? And if you're the kind of guy that is, just one of those cool dudes, he's super nice and he never tells you no or never kicks you out of his office, well, that's the approachability piece of it, right?
Yeah.
That's also probably, if I had to sum it up, I'd say that's probably leadership.
It is
in a nutshell.
It is.
But at the end of the day, right, you're still competing.
Yes.
Too. And you can be humble, approachable, and credible and still compete with other people.
That's right.
You just and the kind of the shiny sentence that we threw out there when it was just you and I talking was, just because you're the smartest guy in the room doesn't mean that you have to tell everybody you're the smartest guy in the room, right? You walk the walk, and everybody then knows that you're the smartest guy in the room, and they start to fall in line. That's the leadership piece, right?
Yep. Yeah, well, that's that old platitude, right? That actions speak louder than words, right? You can be the loudest voice, but people will recognize whether or not there's follow through in what you say. People will and most of the time you don't even have to say it. When you just show up for people and you continue to show up for people, like eventually they'll understand that you're on their side, you're on the team, like your intentions are pure. Like you're really asking for input because you valued the input, not just because you're trying to go, well, I've got to ask for input. So check, I asked, but I don't really care what anybody else has to say because this is my project and we're going to do it my way, kind of a thing, Now it may come to the point where, as the project manager or whatever, you have to make a decision as to which way the thing goes. Like that's part of leadership, is you're the ultimate decision making authority. And you've got to take all those factors into place and then make a decision from there. But it doesn't have to be it doesn't have to be because it's your way or the highway, right? Those are the folks that I think nobody wants to work for. It's, I'll take your input, but it doesn't really matter because we're just going to do it my way anyways, because you're all stupid and I'm smart.
Well, I'd say that guy's not a very good leader.
Well, no, he's not.
He's not. He has not given himself the opportunity to unlearn and relearn.
That's right.
And guys, I mean, we all fall into this trap to a degree.
And there's not a lot of self-awareness there, right?
True. We're all guilty of this. Everybody's guilty of this. And, you've got your hill that you're going to die on one way or another. Maybe it's your sports team. There's guys who wear their Arizona Cardinals shirts around town every day down here. And the Arizona Cardinals fucking suck, dude.
Yeah.
Find a better team.
Yeah.
Don't sit here and tell me that they're awesome and next year's their year. We all know it's not until they fire Kyler Murray, but that's a different discussion. Do you think they're going to take a quarterback in the first round? I think they should.
I hope so.
I think it sends a message like, we're going to rebuild this team and we're going to do.
I don't know that this is a great quarterback class.
Maybe not great, but I mean, look at what you're working with.
Yeah.
He's not the guy. And that's ultimately the question, right? And you want to talk about competition, right? The NFL is a good, it's a good case study in competition, right? Sports in general. Look at the Michael Jordans of the world and the mid 90s run that they had, 6 championships, right? And if you haven't seen that documentary on Netflix about Michael Jordan, The Last Dance, it's worth a watch. It's really good. And what he said was, people say, oh, well, Michael Jordan was an asshole and he was such a dick and all this. And his answer was, he says, yeah, that's coming from people who have never won anything. I fucking love it. Right. That's a competitor right there. I don't care, dude. I'm going to burn it all down to fucking win. And ultimately in sports, that's what it comes down to, because it's all about dollar signs. Right. And when I look at a team like the Arizona Cardinals, I can see Kyler Murray is not the guy. He's not the guy. You need another guy. Now, he can get you through a couple of bad years here until you can get the right draft picks and get the other pieces in play, and then maybe you kick him out. Okay, fine. But I don't think that he's the guy that's going to be the locker room leader in your team that's going to take you to a championship.
Yeah.
look at the difference between a guy like him and a guy like Jalen Hurts, right? They're comparable in a lot of ways, from their backgrounds to their schooling, how they grew up through the college ranks and all that. They're very comparable. The difference is their styles, and I think we've all seen examples of this guy who is going to bitch and complain.
Well,
and
that's
say,
just it.
well, I'm not going to play by those rules
to a certain extent, right?
Exactly. That's my point, right? The character of the man makes the man, and Jalen Hurts, you look at him and he's just a cool, calm, collected. It's like, man, I'm just here to win.
Well, and
I'm
he's
just here to
about
win.
team.
I don't care. Yeah.
Right.
I don't care. If I got to do the tush push 50 fucking times in a game, I'm going to do it.
Yeah.
Because we're just here to win.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and I think Jordan's a good example of that too, right? Because here's a person who was consumed by the idea of competition and being the best and being the greatest and winning the championships. I think you could make an argument, though, that he could have maintained that competitive drive, but gone about it a little bit of a different way too, right?
100%.
Because all of the bridges that he burned, the relationships that he destroyed, the people that if you didn't watch that documentary, you would assume he would be really good friends with after basketball, that he's not, and they want nothing to do with him. There's a balance to find there, which I'm going to get to that here in a second, right? There's definitely
right
a balance
ways to do it and wrong ways.
There totally
sure.
is.
Yeah. And I think we can make some arguments that, he definitely could have done some things different, but just look at his mindset. Yeah. Just regardless of his
mindset, correct.
Yeah. I mean, he was there for the right reasons. Probably needed a personality coach.
Kobe is probably a better example of a better way to execute that drive of competition.
Yeah,
if you want
better,
to use
but still ruthless.
Example in basketball. And sometimes you have to be, right? But a little more of a team collaborator, a little more of a collaborator in that in that environment of competition.
Yeah.
I want to go to something. So I did a little bit of research. Adam Grant, we talked about his book several episodes back. I think he's a great kind of leading thinker on some of these things. And he talks about he's an organizational psychologist. And he goes, and one of the things that he said was, while competition can drive individual performance, collaboration often leads to better outcomes and innovation. And so he talks about giving versus taking. And he said, collaborative givers who share knowledge and support others often achieve more sustainable success than competitive takers. And I think that's important. And that goes back to kind of what we were talking about, right? If you're in a position, even if you're competing in a position or competing for leadership, or if you're in a leadership position, being collaborative and being one of those people that tries to give knowledge or to give opportunity and give some openness and some time for other people to bring up ideas and things like that. Like in the end, that's always going to help you find a better outcome, potentially, right? Because we all have blind spots. We all have things when we're looking at a problem that we're not going to catch, we're not going to see. If you go back to anything that we've talked about so far, you go back to NASA and the space race, right? There wasn't one engineer that was the only engineer that was in charge of figuring out X problem, right? It was a collaborative effort of all these people from all these different backgrounds, electrical, mechanical, aeronautical, astrophysical, whatever you want to, that had to come together and go through all these evolutions and iterations because with those different backgrounds, you go, well, dude, yeah, that works here, but what about this? What about when we get to this? And that's an issue now. And we have to rethink. So like that collaborative versus just the my way or the highway kind of cat, right? Or the person that tries to grab knowledge from everybody else and use it to make a decision or take all the credit for a decision that's being made. Like that's not going to be an effective leader. That's not somebody that's going to build that reputation that we're talking about in a competitive environment.
I like one thing that I would question about Adam Grant's statement there that you read off was, I think, can you reread that about what you said about achieving success?
He just said that Grant emphasizes that collaborative givers who share knowledge and support others often achieve more sustainable success.
Okay.
And
my only question on that would be, or my only statement on that would be, it depends on who's defining success. If you take this down to an individual level, our individual levels of success are going to be defined differently. depending on what endeavor we're going out to. Like if you and I decided we're going to go run a marathon, your level of success is going to be different than mine because I just can't run as fast as you.
Yeah.
I'm not trained in that way, and my body's incapable of doing some of those things. So my level of success may be sub 4 hours. Yours may be sub 2 hours.
Yeah.
And so I think that there's some gray area in there just in that definition, for sure. And I had another point, and that squirrel is fucking gone.
Well, I think his next point kind of gets to what he means by the sustainability of success, because at the end of the day, dude, if you're a taker, you're going to burn bridges and break relationships, right?
I remember what it was now.
Go ahead.
You were talking about leaders and taking in information and making decisions and those kinds of things. I think there's a solid argument to be made that oftentimes we see teams succeed when the leader is not the smartest person on the team.
That's very true.
Because he goes in there with a little bit of an open mind and he's
a little bit of humility.
A little bit of humility. And he goes, guys, my goal, my job here is not to solve the problem. I am not going to solve this problem. You guys are going to solve this problem, right? I'm going to be the one that packages it into a nice deliverable and send it up the chain, right? But my goal here is to get you the resources that you need and be the shit screen for all the crap rolling downhill so that I can enable you to solve the problem. And this is, I'll give you an example of this. Let me just go story time for just a second.
Well, go ahead. Just real quick, I was just going to say what you're talking about is you build buy-in, right?
100%.
You build buy-in and accountability by doing that. And I've got a great example of you for that we both lived.
But also that guy has to actually do the things that he preaches. Okay.
That's right.
Downrange, 2000 and awesome. I don't remember what it was. And I stop over at Kandahar and I meet my new squadron commander, my new DO for the next 6 months. And I could tell right away I'm not going to be friends with these people because in the 2 days that I spent there, I could tell that they were the type of people who they didn't want to rock the boat too much. All they cared about was looking good to the generals, right? And they were going to kind of shit on their people a little bit to do that. And so I'm like, okay, didn't say anything, swallow hard, move on. I get out to my fob and some shit went down. We started doing, we had 2 Chinooks that were going into a landing zone. And in that part of the country, it wasn't really hard to figure out where a helicopter can land and where it can't, because it's all grape fields. And they had this really genius way of irrigating these things. They dug these like 6 foot deep trenches, and the water table seeped up through that, and that's how they would irrigate their grapes. Right? It was really smart. But you can't land a helicopter there. So if you had any kind of flat, round, flat area or whatever, the bad guys knew it. They went out there and they booby trapped this thing. They took grenades and they looped string through the pins, stuck them in sticks all around the LZ. And so when the Chinooks came in that night, the rotor wash knocked all the sticks down, pulled the pins on the grenade, fragged the shit out of the helicopter. They lift off, come back. We didn't do the air assault. So we're sitting in a meeting one day, and the 06 is like, guys, how are we going to solve this? What are we going to do? And I'm sitting in there with like the fires guy, and we'd kind of been kicking around some ideas, and we were like, hey, what if we dropped a bomb on the LZ before the Chinooks go in, like an hour before or something? We could drop an air bursted 500-pound bomb, clear all that shit out of there. And so we tried it one night, and it fucking worked. Holy shit, right? And there were processes in place from the KAOC all the way down. There were processes already in place. We just had to pick them up and dust them off a little bit and energize that system. And it was, it was complicated. It was a little bit of growing pains with it, but we worked it out. So we started doing that every air assault that we did. And I literally wrote the book. I sat there on my night shift in the talk, and I wrote up the SOP on how to do this tactic because it wasn't very familiar to a lot of people.
Yeah.
And there were a lot of AOs, a lot of areas around the battle space that were encountering the same problems that we had. So I wanted to share that with them, right? So I packaged it up in this nice document that had hyperlinks and maps and how-tos and all this shit in it and contact information and all this stuff. And I sent it up to my commander, and he poo-pooed on it. He said, "No, we're not going to do that. We're not going to publish that. And I'm like, why not? Right. The whole reason that we're here is to shorten the kill chain so that we can protect good guys from bad guys. Right. And if you are a barrier to that success, then I'm going to mow you the fuck down, dude.
Yeah.
And I did something I wasn't supposed to do. I sent it to the Chaos instead of to him. Well, after he poo-pooed on it, I sent it to the Chaos. And I got in a little trouble for that because he viewed me sort of as a cowboy. And I'm like, dude, you got in the way of us solving a fucking problem.
Yeah.
That's not what leadership does.
No.
Right? You're not in it to take the credit for it. You're definitely not in it to stop me from innovating here.
Yeah.
You should be on a fucking pedestal giving me guidance, giving me the resources that I need, getting the fuck out of my way so that I can do this, right?
Yeah.
And so anyways, that was that left a bad taste in my mouth with that guy. And I asked him straight up on my way out of the country, I said, hey, I just want to know, when did you move from the attitude of let's get shit done to I'm going to protect my own ass? And that's kind of what I left that dude with.
Nice.
Anyways.
No, that's
maybe
a great
he chewed
story,
on that for the rest of his career. Maybe he said Roscoe's a fucking asshole and he moved on.
Well,
so
whatever. I mean,
probably did.
You're right. Like when I was in command of the 425th, like I would tell everybody, like my job here is to remove obstacles and make your jobs easier. That's my role here. That's what I exist to do. So if you guys have a problem, if you're not getting what you need, if you're having an issue with another organization, then I'm the guy you call. Because I know the squadron commander, I can call over there, I can unfuck whatever's being fucked and get you what you need to be able to do your guys' job so that we can keep this thing rolling. Yeah. So, and I think that's part of what he's getting at too, right? Is you want to be able to build relationships and have some humility so that you can get that buy-in and people start to take some accountability for what you're working towards, right? And one good example of how you do that is, remember when we were in when we first all got to the 425th and we kind of started doing things a little different, right? Because like when I got there, Iceberg and those guys, they're having students write their own grade sheets. It's the same fucking can scenario every day. You remember we had a US only IP meeting. Do you remember that? And I brought everybody in and I'm like, dudes, how do we attack this? What are we going to do? Like, what's the best? And I needed input, right? So I'm a weapons officer. I've written syllabuses. I've, syllabi at the operational level, at the B course. I've done a ton of instructing in my life. I have a pretty good idea about how I want to attack this.
Yeah.
I've never had Wizzos.
Yeah.
I've never had to teach another country's pilots
culturally. Yeah.
I've never had these cultural barriers in some ways. Sometimes, at least for the first couple of months, the language barrier about the best way to convey this, and I didn't have all the answers too, because I had just gotten there. I'd never really been to the 425th before. So are we doing briefs and debriefs? Like do you guys teach DFP? Is that the model that's being used? Is there something else that I don't know. Right. And so that's what you do, man. You bring people in and you ask the questions and you get information and you get feedback. Because you don't have all the answers. You're never going to have all the answers, right?
Well,
and
there's also go ahead.
Go ahead.
I was going to say there was also a period in there where I think we all just kind of I know I did, just kind of backed away for just a second and observe. Yeah. Right. I need to see what's going on, take some data points down and see where we can make improvements.
Yeah.
And I told a story in my book about Fuego and I didn't exactly start off on the right foot. And that story. It was a funny story. But we ended up actually working really well together because we recognized each other's strengths and weaknesses, I think.
Yeah.
And we played to that. And he did the same thing as you did. He goes, Roscoe, I don't know what the fuck to do with these Wizzos, man. Let's bang our craniums together and let's try to figure this out, right? And so, I mean, essentially what we did was photocopy the pilot syllabus and just change the words at the top and then go from there. Make some alterations from there. And I remember the initial reaction from the RSAF guys when we started doing some of that stuff, and they were just like, "What the fuck is going on here?" Well, yeah, man. I mean, we're gonna smash some doors down here. We're
you
gonna
guys
change
aren't paperweights anymore.
This isn't a flying club anymore.
No,
we're actually going to do some stuff.
Yeah, we're actually going to teach you guys. So yeah, it was interesting, and I took the same approach, and I think that's important. An important thing to stress too is if you're coming into a position, maybe you've been promoted and you're coming into a new position, into a new group of people that you haven't been with before. One of the best things I think you can do is that first month or two is just take a step back and observe.
Yep.
Right? You may have some really great ideas out the door that you want to initiate, but I'll tell you what, man, you do not want to be the guy that's the bull in the china shop that just walks in and starts changing everything, right? You gotta have a little bit of time to build some trust, a little bit of time to build a reputation with those folks, and take the opportunity to really see what's going on and where the weak points may be, because your initial perceptions can be completely wrong. And I don't know how many times you saw that, but I saw that so many times in a squadron where a new DO would show up and all of a sudden everything in scheduling changes and everything in training changes because he's got all these ideas that he's been carrying.
That's what I did when I was a captain. Yeah.
He's been collecting them for 16 years and he thinks his way is the best way and the only way to do something. And everything comes off the rails. And now all of a sudden everything's in fucking shambles. There's a ton of fucking chaos. You know, the schedule explodes on a daily basis, and everybody's left to pick the pieces up.
Why does that happen, though? Is it because his idea was a bad idea?
Not necessarily.
Or is it because the people didn't believe in it?
Yeah, that's just it. And there was no trust built yet, right? So,
bingo.
Like when I became the DO in the 308th, they were, I just come from Paycom. Most of the guys, I know some of the guys in the squadron, but not a lot of the guys in the squadron. None of the flight commanders, And so I remember I walk in the first time for them to sell me the schedule. And they're all looking at me like, okay, what's this Yahoo going to fuck up?
What's the new guy going to do?
Yeah, what's the new guy going to say we have to do about this? And I just walked in and I said, hey, dudes, here's the deal. I go, I'm not changing a thing. I go, I don't know how you guys need to tell me how you do this. You guys need to tell me how you operate, how you guys build week to week, like how you get priorities. If what you guys have been doing is working, or if we need to change some things. Like I'm here to observe and let you guys kind of show me the ropes for the first month or two, and then we'll figure out if there's things that we need to adjust. And they were floored, dude. They were all just looking at me like, who the fuck is this guy, right? Like so it would, but it worked.
Well, I think in a situation like that, and one example that I was going to bring up is, have you ever been selected for a team where the situation was really bad, the team was failing hard, and they needed somebody to come in and shake things up?
Yeah.
Right? We need you to make changes, right? And that's really difficult because you want to go in there and just tear it all down and rebuild it.
Yeah.
Right? But at the same time, there's going to be some nuggets in there that and what do we used to say? It was start, stop, continue was kind of the way that we go into, looking at our processes. Are we going to start a new process? Are we going to continue the same process, or are we going to stop it and make some changes? Right. And there's a lot of different versions of that little mantra. But in a situation like you were just talking about, man, I think the best thing that you can do walking into that, and a lot of this is hindsight for me because I didn't always do this right, but one of the things that you can do is just ask why a lot.
Yeah.
I want to know how we're going to do it. And then I'm probably going to ask you why we're doing it that way. And if you have a really good explanation to it, maybe we just continue it, but if you don't, if the answer is, well, this is just the way we do it. Okay. Now we've got some room to negotiate here. And maybe I can bring a new idea to it. Maybe we can sit in a room and we can go, hey guys, how can we streamline this just a little bit better?
Yeah.
And I think you earn a little bit better street cred if you go in with that idea or that model versus going in with a fucking sledgehammer.
Yeah, absolutely. And when I was the DO in the 308th and I came in like that, like I would those first couple of weeks, I'd ask the same question: is what do you guys need? What is there something that needs to change? What are the roadblocks that you guys have to being able to execute what you want to execute? Mm-hmm. And at first they're like, yeah, sure, whatever, right? But when I said that every time, after about the first 4 to 6 weeks, all of a sudden I start getting little kernels, right? Little feedback. Well, maintenance kind of marches to the same drum as all the other squadrons. Like we don't really have an ability to kind of affect how we set up the jets for this phase, because the AMUs kind of all work in concert with, because there were some manning issues in the maintenance side at that time. So the AMUs kind of just all kind of did the same thing for each phase. And they didn't really want to deviate from that because it's extra work, right?
Yeah.
And I'm like, all right, well, what do you guys need, right? And so let's go talk to maintenance about that, right? And we could make things work. And then all of a sudden things work better, right? And so sometimes just by having that humility and asking those questions too, you open the door to let people know that you're actually you actually care and you're engaged and want their feedback. And then when you act on good feedback and then changes happen and they're good changes, like that builds trust, right?
Yeah.
And now you start to get even more feedback. Sometimes it gets harder to wade through it all, but I think that's a good approach. And that all goes back to that humble, approachable, credible piece.
Yeah. I want to go back to the competition collaboration stuff, and I want to throw out some obstacles to collaboration that I was able to dig up. And guys, this is fucking, I'm not smart. This is Google shit, right? You guys can look this up. Personalities. That's kind of a big thing when you're putting a group together, you know, and we can do a whole episode on team building and going through the stages. And you and I both have seen good examples of it, and we've seen examples of it when it breaks down.
Yeah.
You know, and the classic example is like when you go to SOS, right? And you're in a room full of strangers and they say from day one, minute one, you guys are supposed to operate like a team. Dude, it doesn't work that way.
Yeah.
You know, we're only here for 6 weeks and it's going to take at least that long for us to even learn each other's names.
Yeah.
Right. So it's anyways. And on the personality side, you're going to have a quiet person who sits in the corner and doesn't say anything. You're going to have a class clown. You're going to have the robust personality who always has something to say. You're going to have the super nerd over here taking a bunch of notes. Like you've got all these different people with these different personalities. And a lot of times that comes with different strengths and weaknesses too.
Yeah.
And so the quicker that you can, in a collaborative environment, the quicker that you can learn to lean into that and identify those things, then, you know, maybe you can knock down that barrier. But yeah, personalities, you got the one guy with the overbearing personality. He's going to be, you know, the loudest voice in the room potentially. And so people are going to, I think initially they will gravitate towards that just because it's magnetic, right?
It can be.
But that doesn't mean he's always right.
Nope.
Just because his voice is loud and
That's
he's,
right.
you know, leading the charge on PT day or whatever it is, it doesn't mean it. And I've had this conversation with my kid a lot in the environment that he's in ROTC. I was like, dude, leadership does not mean you always hold the gavel. Leadership does not mean that you're the loudest voice. Sometimes it does, for sure. But also, sometimes leadership just means that you stop in the hallway and pick up the trash off the floor.
Yeah.
It's really, you know, those little subtle things, I think, that really bring it forward. Exactly. And you don't have to tell anybody that you picked up the trash.
Yeah.
They just walk through the hallway and they go, oh, cool, the trash is up. This is awesome. Right.
Yeah.
Competition between individuals hurts collaboration. Right. And that we sort of hit on that earlier when we talked about a little bit of the subversion and the, hey, man, if I can just knock him down a peg or two or plant a seed of doubt in somebody else about that guy, then that moves me ahead a little bit. Well, that ultimately it's going to affect the overall collaborative effort.
Agreed. And sometimes it's not even that. Sometimes it's not a competition thing. I mean, I think you and I saw an example one time where, and this is where it gets difficult if you're in leadership. I think it's hard to peel back this onion and find out exactly what people's motivations are. But sometimes people will be barriers to moving forward because they're afraid of moving forward.
That's valid.
You know, sometimes
actually on my list here it says resistance to change. I was going to bring that up next.
So people will resist it just because it's change, and maybe they're worried about how that change is going to illuminate or reflect their own capabilities or abilities. And in my experience, those people are the ones that are sometimes the most difficult people to manage and deal with because they dig in and they dig in hard because they're so worried about maybe their own shortcomings being exposed,
highlighted,
that they fight tooth and nail because they don't want that to happen, right? And so, understanding that, but being able to understand that that's their motive, that's the motivation behind it, can be a difficult thing to do, right? Which is why I think it's really important not to rush to judgment necessarily. You got to, like you were saying, Roscoe, you got to take some time to observe. And give yourself the time that you need to kind of, I don't know, just be able to think on. And, you've got an ultimate goal in mind, but sometimes you got to give yourself a little bit of space to just see how people operate and give yourself some time to really discern what are the underlying motivations that are causing them to behave or react or resist the way that
it's hard when shit has to happen now, though. If you get immediacy, can lead to it leads to different.
Well,
tactics,
and I would say that that's a situation where you're in a limited resource environment, and
because time is a
more
resource.
competition.
I'll get that.
If you're in a leadership position at that point, then sometimes you just got to go, hey, here's the decision. We're moving forward. 1, 2, 3, hike, right?
I mean, put that onto the other person if you're in a followership position too. If you're one of those people that you step into the room and go, guys, we got to solve this problem now. Here are your 3 criteria. Here's the way I see this going. Sometimes you have to shut up and color, man.
Yeah.
And in the military, it was a little more, I think it was a little more clearly defined just because we had a chain of command.
Yeah.
And so when the commander says, this is the way we're going to do it, and you and I both have been in rooms. Hierarchical. You and I both have been in rooms. Hell, I've been in your room where you made a decision that I didn't agree with. But when the door opens and we all walk out, the commander made a decision.
Yeah, we're unified.
I don't have to agree with it, but I'm going to execute it.
Yeah.
And if it goes sour, I'll own my piece of it, but it ultimately falls back on him.
Yeah.
Because I voiced my opinion in the meeting in an open environment when he was asking for opinions, but ultimately he made a decision. It didn't agree with what I had to say. Fine. Okay, we're moving forward. That's in a military, right? And I work in a civilian environment now, and I will say that that's not always the case.
True.
There's a little more, I'd say there's a little more shit talking behind the scenes.
Sure.
Than maybe what we saw. It's not always, well, the commander made a decision.
Sure,
it's
there's
like,
a little more sport bitching. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. But you're right, man. That resistance to change, that's a tough one, man, because I know the example that you're talking about. Not only was that potentially going to highlight some things about him personally, it was also going to affect his daily way of life.
Yeah.
Because he had grown very accustomed to a very easy, kind of laid back flying club, kind of, I'm just going to go in and fly my sword. Oh, no. We're going to start asking a little bit more of you.
Yeah.
And we're going to start turning over some rocks here. And I'm sorry, but that's just the way it is.
Yeah.
And I know that person dug in really hard on that, but ultimately he lost. And ultimately we saw through his bullshit.
Yeah.
In the end.
Ultimately, it was better for the organization too, because we
100%.
took those guys to such a higher level of execution than they had ever been at in their lives before. So one of the other thing that Grant talks about is just the network effects, and this kind of goes back to what you were talking about earlier, which is just that a lot of times too, man, and this is what you and I have been hitting on too. It's really more about building relationships and networks. That humble, approachable, credible model allows you to build trust, to build, a reputation of respect, and that you value input and that you listen, right? And so building those networks and relationships can be very beneficial through a collaborative process, right? If you're in a straight competitive process, there's not a lot of collaboration. There's not a lot of opportunity to build those relationships. But when you're in that collaborative process, you can build stronger relationships, which oftentimes allow you to have more resources and opportunities available to you for whatever the outcomes are that you're looking for, versus competition. So,
well, and I want to go back to something that you said really early on. I think it was when you were throwing out the definitions, and we were kind of, we were just trying to get our arms around what is competition and who are we competing with and da-da-da. And I threw out a line like in minute 2 of this whole show of like, everything's a competition. And I really believe that, man. I really do, because I believe that you can always compete with yourself.
That's right.
Right. Even in a collaborative environment, right? If I'm in a environment where, there's a room full of people and we're supposed to be solving this problem, my competition doesn't have to be with the next guy. My competition can be just, dude, I'm going to show up early every day prepared. I'm going to bring my fucking A game. And if I don't know the answer, I'm going to ask the question. Those kinds of things. That's competition, because you are challenging yourself to be a little bit better every single day. And by this is, god dang, dude, this is the whole full fucking circle, right? This is that big O knot. This is the fucking 1 of 5 bullshit, right? Is when you handle your shit, when you compete with yourself and you make yourself the best version of yourself that you can every day, everybody sees that shit and it elevates their game, right? That's the whole fucking concept behind the idea that you are you're the product of the 5 people that you spend the most time with. Well, if you're one of those people that's always being the best version, man, you're influencing the fuck out of that guy.
Yeah.
And he wants to be that much better. And guess what that does for the team? Like everything elevates,
100%,
right?
Yeah. Yeah. And sometimes competition isn't winning over others, it's winning with others, right? Like competition doesn't have to just be power over or winning over. It can be winning with and winning through. So, and even Grant says that, healthy competition isn't inherently bad, but it's about balance. We talk about this all the time, right? It's about finding the right balance. And most of the time, and this is what I'm getting at, like a hybrid approach is what you're going to use. You're in competition, but you may collaborate to do it, right?
Oh, you have to.
Right.
You absolutely have to.
Unless it's just like, hey, football or, some kind of a sports analogy where you're fighting for a position. But even then you're going to collaborate because you're going to go, hey, dude, how'd you do that? How do you make that cut? How did you set yourself up for that? Right. Like you're going to get tips, techniques and procedures from other people to try to elevate your game. So, yeah. Like,
dude, do you know how many meetings I had with other coaches?
Sure.
When I was coaching football, we used to have meetings with all the other teams around the division, and we just sit around and talk coaching shit. Like, well, how do you run your practices? And what kind of drills are you doing?
Yeah.
Like, what's your focus for the season? And I would have meetings. I would go over and meet the head coaches of the other teams before the games, and we just stand there and talk and bullshit. And the guy asked me, he says, "Hey, so how do you guys? What's your approach? I haven't seen you guys on film yet. What's your game about?" And I was like, "Oh, we got a pretty good mix. We throw the ball, we run the ball. I think we're pretty tough on defense, and we've got the ability to run a few different things. And what's yours?" And he goes, "Oh, we're a flag football team with pads on. We're going to throw the ball 100 times a game and hope that a couple stick, and that's it." I'm like, "Well, cool." But you learn through all that, right? And and then you compete on the field, and at the end of the game, you shake hands and go, "Hey, dude, that worked or that didn't work." But yeah, that collaborative. I mean, even take it down to an individual level, Cass. When you were training for your half marathon, right? Yeah. You didn't go at it alone. I remember having conversations with you where you talked about changing your nutrition habits and changing your running habits and your form, and how you had to think about leaning forward or leaning back and your breathing technique and all that stuff.
Yep.
That's collaboration. You're asking for outside help to make yourself better.
Yeah. And asking people that have done it, how'd you do it? What'd you do? How'd you plan for it? What's your nutrition? What's your nutrition during the race, before the race? Like, you collaborate and you get that information. Part of that information gathering.
Well, the best athletes on the planet, man. I've been watching a lot of world championship level triathlon videos recently. It's good motivation for me to get off my fucking couch and go do something, right?
Yeah.
That's kind of my life hack. If I haven't said that before to people, that's my hack, right? When I don't feel like going and doing shit, I put on a YouTube David Goggins video, or I put on a CrossFit video, or I put on one of these type of things. And within 10 minutes, I'm like, all right, fuck, let me go get my shoes on and go, right?
Yeah.
It works, and discipline is, that daily discipline and those habits, man. Even within that, sometimes you need a little push.
Yeah.
You're not gonna always wake up with this big bright smile on your face, ready to go for a run, right? Sometimes you need a little motivation, and that's one of my hacks.
Yeah.
But even when I'm watching those videos, man, I'm looking at the team that surrounds that guy.
Yeah.
He's the one out there on competition day with the bib on, riding and swimming and running. But look at the team that he's got. He's got family members that are helping him cook his food. He's got nutritional specialists that are coming in and telling him what supplements to use and why. He's got psychologists that are helping him with the mindset of a long ass day of running. I mean, all these things, right? Yeah. To get him to be the best that he can be on race day.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I was thinking about the other day because Alicia and I are a big F1 fan, and there's 20 drivers on the grid, and all the focus is on these guys. But dude, when you see the immensity of the team behind them, not just the pit crew, but dude, the engineers that sit there in labor to figure out what the car is going to look like the next year. What are the small tweaks in aerodynamics and structure and material and all these things that go into them building a car that they field for a season, and it's insane. It's insane, the number of people. And that's such a collaborative effort. There's one guy that's the face of it. There's one guy out there leading the charge for it. But then you look at all the guys that operate the teams, and those are your leaders. Those are your guys that are trying to drive that competition. They're competing against the other teams on the grid, but that collaborative effort that happens behind the scenes is so important to their success, right?
Well, so this whole conversation, an hour and 9 minutes now, it's this big self-licking ice cream cone, right? Where competition is good and bad, but competition with yourself at a personal, individual level can lead to great collaboration.
Yes.
Right? And collaboration can lead to great competition.
Yes.
Right. Overall. So it's like, it's almost like a Ponzi scheme. It's a fucking pyramid, right?
Yeah. And at the end of the day, that's what I would say is compete, guys. Compete and collaborate, right? Like compete with humility, compete with an outlook on how can I learn something from the people around me? How can I get better from the people around me? How can we win as a team versus how am I going to win, right? That's the way to focus this, and then go out there and compete.
Yeah, and I know that kind of the big meaty part of this discussion was more, we talked a lot about leadership, and that's wrapped up in here for sure, whether it's at a personal level or a team level or organizational level.
Well, you can just remember you can lead at any level. You don't have to be in a position of leadership to lead.
Good point. Great point. And that's great. It brings me right back to what I was saying earlier, and this is what I leave people with is that competition with yourself is going to drive personal excellence. And personal excellence is the piece that's going to move you forward. And everybody else is going to see that shit. And they're going to go, wow, fuck, I need to elevate my game. And now they start to elevate their game. It's contagious, bro. Winning is contagious.
It is.
And the more that you can win at an individual level, other people see that shit and they want to win. And when they get a taste of it, it's like crack, man. Once you get a taste of it, you just want a little bit more. And it pushes you a little bit harder. Look at David, look at Tyler, look at Devin, all these guys that we've had a chance to influence and get them to get their ball rolling a little bit. And once they got that ball rolling a little bit, now it's huge. It's just going downhill. Right.
That's right.
Yeah. It's great, man.
Yeah.
Awesome.
100%. What else you got?
Anything else?
Nope.
I say be the one.
Be the change.
Thanks for flying with the Be One Change One podcast. If you got something out of this show, then be the one and share it in your circles of influence.
You can be our wingman through our website at www.be1change1.com. That's B and the number 1, change and the number 1.com.
We invite you to be the one and join our fighter squadron on social media at Be1Change1 on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. You can follow us at Paul Roscoe White on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn, as well as Roscoe's website, www.paulroscoewhite.com.
You can email us from the website and please leave comments, share, and ask questions, or leave ideas of things you would like to discuss on future podcasts. Most importantly, be the one that helps us win the algorithm by leaving a review on whatever platform you're listening on.
Thanks for joining. Until next time, be the one.